how does a teacher invite so that learners will really respond and act? How do we help people act?
I'll give two illustrations, but I hope the illustrations won't be heard very well because they're examples of a higher principle. Mm-hmm. So, for example, the simple process of asking a question invites people to act. Mm-hmm. They do not have to respond. There are some people who are so terrified to speak, to raise their hand, that they would never comment. But if they will hear and respond to the question mentally and spiritually, they are acting, though they don't overtly raise a hand. So simply posing a question is an example of inviting learners to act.
Okay. That's a simple one.
Second one, for example, every class session is not self-contained. So I will frequently, a person will pose a question, and I know the answer for me. Mm-hmm. In the church, I think we far too often try to project our own answers for me onto everybody else. The issue is helping people get their own answer. So given a particular challenge or a particular issue, I'll just invite them to get a copy of the Book of Mormon, inexpensive missionary copy. Begin reading it from page 1 to the last page. You cannot cheat and do a computer keyword search. And if they're concerned about how do I forgive somebody who has wronged me in a horrific way, I'll just invite them. Now you read the Book of Mormon and you look for people, circumstances, cases where people were terribly wronged and they were willing to forgive. Find them, study them, and when you get all done, just on a little piece of paper, 2 or 3 things that you learned from what you studied about those episodes. Now, that's reading the whole Book of Mormon. That's not going to happen from week 1 to week 2.
Right.
But there may be a chapter or there may be an episode. And a part of where you pick up the next week is what did you learn as a result of doing that? Now, again, we have a curriculum and we have so much stuff that we're supposed to cover. But a few minutes showing a continuity from what we learned last week to what we're doing this week is time very well spent.
And very seldom do we do any follow-up, any review, any connection between lessons that we teach in the church like this.
Which is a part of the reason why people don't believe us when we say, well, you need to read the stuff in preparation for the class. Sometimes they do, and it's like, okay, so why did I do that?
Right. It'll never come up.
Yeah.
In a training session that you did with seminary and institute teachers, you invited those present, and I was one of those present. I remember I was sitting right in front of the podium there. You invited us to take a Book of Mormon like that and find the word strength or strengthen. Mm-hmm. My wife and I have actually been doing that. We just finished Helaman today, so now we're into 3rd Nephi. We're getting toward the end of the Book of Mormon. We've been looking, and you said the same thing. You said, don't just do a computer search, because in a sense, and I wondered, why did he say that? But I think what you're saying is, don't just look at single verses out of context, but look at the whole thing in context.
And it requires you to act and to work.
It
to
does.
Find them in the context, and you're reading along, and here's the story, and you go, well, here's Alma and his people being persecuted by Amulon. Yeah. Okay, in this whole episode, okay, I see how this strengthening thing fits in here.
Right.
You don't get that with a keyword search.
You don't.
So there's a work that is required to find them and extract them out of the context of the entire story. I think the best answer to your question about what can you do to invite people to act is that one who has been called as a teacher should seek for, appropriately, the spiritual gift of discernment. And as that teacher is prayerful, then according to the needs of a particular class or of specific individuals, you will know in the moment what that invitation to act will be. So I don't want people to think, okay, you invite them to read or you invite them to ask questions. There's not a checklist.
Right.
That's why I said I don't want those 2 illustrations to obscure the overarching principle. Right. There are inspired invitations that you can't always pre-plan, that will occur as you're inspired by the Holy Ghost. That's the key, is the receptivity to those impressions that will come from the Holy Ghost.